In 1938, Samsung began as a small trading company that sold noodles, dried fish, and local vegetables. Back then, it was impossible to imagine that Samsung would transform into one of the world's most valuable companies, creating skyscrapers, roads, hospitals, clothes, robots, and whatnot. What trade secret did Samsung use that took it from selling noodles to becoming an electronic giant? Libyan Chol founded Samsung at just 28. He says that one night he had a panicked realization that he was wasting his life. Thereafter, he committed himself to building a business by selling offbeat items. Despite Samsung's humble beginnings selling groceries, Lee always had a bigger vision. He chose the name Samsung, which means 3 stars. Big, powerful, and everlasting are perfect words to describe what Samsung has become. But at first, it didn't look like Samsung was even going to survive, as the Korean War had a devastating impact on Lee's business and the entire country. So Lee decided to diversify his business and create affordable goods for the public. He started by creating a sugar refinery, and then using the profits from that. He opened the largest woolen mill in the country. This allowed Samsung to expand into textiles, and they began creating finished products like clothing. Lee reinvested the money he made into other new areas, like opening a department store and getting into the insurance business. To this day, Samsung is the largest insurance provider in South Korea. With all of this rapid expansion of his business, it wasn't long before Lee was the richest man in the country, and he was about to get a lot richer. In 1968, Samsung executives had a meeting where they decided the next market to enter was electronics. A year later, Samsung Electronics was fully set up, and they created a 12-inch black and white TV. Within a decade, they'd become the world's #1 black and white TV manufacturer, thanks to their efficient assembly line production, and this success led them to start producing all kinds of home appliances. But they soon realized that to produce all these electronic goods, they heavily relied on importing so many small components from abroad. So they bought a semiconductor company to fully control the supply chain. They not only used these chips in their own products, but started selling them globally to other electronics manufacturers, opening yet another product line for Samsung. One of their many customers is Apple, which has used Samsung memory chips in their iPhones, despite the fact the two companies are fierce rivals in the smartphone market. But what's fascinating about Samsung is all the industries they've expanded into that you never normally hear about. For example, under a division called Samsung Heavy Industries, Samsung specializes in making giant ships and is one of the largest mega shipbuilders in the world. Another division called Samsung Construction and Trading makes roads, tunnels, bridges, and buildings. Amazingly, the world's tallest building, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, was built by Samsung. They even own South Korea's largest theme park. Everland have their own hotels, and a place in Korea called Samsung Town. So whilst many of us probably know the Samsung brand from its success in mobile phones, consumer monitors, and gadgets, that's barely the tip of the iceberg. We haven't even mentioned Samsung's nonprofit foundation, which includes a university and a hospital called Samsung Medical Center. You guessed it right. Samsung even has a hospital. The fact that Samsung has expanded into so many industries may sound like an incredible business success story, but that is certainly not the full story. The real truth is much more controversial. Following the Korean War, the president was eager to expand the economy and decided to support large Korean businesses by offering them very easy financing and protecting them from the competition. In other words, Samsung and a couple of other big South Korean businesses got extremely favorable loans and special tax breaks to help them expand. The idea was that helping these big companies grow a lot larger would help the overall country's economy. The government was essentially funneling American relief money that South Korea received after the war straight into Samsung, and this is what allowed them to expand so rapidly. And this was all thanks to Samsung's founder Lee and his ability to make very strategic political connections, like becoming good friends with South Korea's presidents. As a result of this friendship, Samsung continually got special treatment. Now, to be fair, it's true that the government helped Samsung so much in many ways. It helped the whole of South Korea's economy, especially because Samsung employed huge amounts of people as it grew. But the government's favorable treatment of Samsung often ended up hurting other smaller Korean businesses. How could anyone compete with a government-supported conglomerate with vast resources and wealth? When they entered a new market, Samsung could crush anyone they wanted, which meant that some viewed Lee as a symbol of corruption. It could also be argued that by helping Samsung so much, the South Korean economy is now over-reliant on one single company, and if things go bad for Samsung, it could have a terrible effect on the entire nation, especially because Samsung is so heavily involved in so many different industries. A study in 2014 found Samsung composed about 17% of the entire South Korean economy. When Samsung's founder, Libyan Chol, died in 1987, his son Lee Khan took over the business, and this is where Samsung's ties to the government got even more controversial. Firstly, in 1996, Lee Khan was charged with bribing a former president but was pardoned. Then, in 2008, Lee Khan was accused of managing a political slush fund used to bribe prosecutors and politicians. He was found guilty of tax evasion and embezzlement, to which he apologized and resigned from the company. But there was no jail time. Within just 2 years, he was pardoned and returned to work as the chairman of Samsung, as if nothing had happened. This just shows how tightly Samsung and the government are connected. Samsung has done plenty of good in South Korea, but its growth isn't quite the fairy tale it may have seemed. However, we're not quite done yet because no story of Samsung would be complete without talking about the biggest disaster in its history. Imagine waking up in your room only to find it filled with smoke. There's an awful smell, and you're struggling to breathe. You look over and see your Samsung Note 7 smartphone is on fire. Scenes like this played out multiple times worldwide in 2016, and airlines soon banned the phone from flights. What's concerning is Samsung knew about several of these incidents and initially did nothing. And only when the media picked up the story was Samsung forced to stop production and recall the products. This cost them over $5 billion, not to mention the reputational damage. To make things even worse, the initial replacement product Samsung issued also had the same overheating problem. That's because Samsung initially blamed the battery as the issue, but it was actually more complex. The real root of the problem can be traced back to Samsung's ongoing battle with Apple. If we rewind to 2011, Apple was suing Samsung, claiming they copied the design of their iPhone, demanding billions of dollars, while Steve Jobs publicly called Samsung copycats. Samsung executives were determined to create something new, and thus they launched their Galaxy Note series, a cross between a tablet and a smartphone. But for the Note 7 model, Samsung executives wanted to add in lots of new features, and they also demanded tight deadlines with very aggressive specifications. Samsung engineers recall that it became a chaotic rush to finish the product by the deadline, and they didn't realize it at the time. But basically, in the race to try and be Apple, Samsung had rushed the product's development too much. They'd crammed the Note 7 with too many features and not spend enough time on quality control. Before realizing the issues, they sold millions of these dangerous phones all around the world and spent gigantic sums of money on marketing it. And as if this hadn't been a big enough PR disaster already, Samsung then tried to suppress information about the whole thing. For example, when people on YouTube created parody videos, Samsung copyright strike the videos despite having absolutely no rights to do so. This backfired further as their attempts at censorship created yet more buzz and controversy around the whole story. Given the very humble beginnings of how Samsung started, it really is quite amazing what the company has become. If you enjoy watching these kinds of videos, you might want to check out the playlist on this channel. Keep supporting this channel by liking this video, commenting on which topics you want to watch videos on, and subscribing to this channel.